COINTELPRO, the secret program to destroy black consciousness. Have you ever wondered why so many black leaders in the United States were silenced, killed, or mysteriously disappeared at the peak of their power? Behind the speeches, the marches, the raised fists, and the hope of a people for justice, there was something much larger operating in the shadows. It wasn't just institutional racism. It wasn't just the police on the streets. It was something invisible, something calculated, something orchestrated in the dark corridors of power. It was COINTELPRO. Few know, even fewer believe. And almost no one has had the courage to tell this story as it truly was. COINTELPRO. A cold acronym. A technical name. But behind these letters hides one of the greatest psychological warfare operations against the black community that the United States has ever seen. And all of this was done in the name of national security. But the question that remains unanswered is, security for whom? For the system that has always dominated? Or for the people who were beginning to awaken to their strength and worth? Because COINTELPRO in truth meant only one thing: to destroy any black movement that dared to rise. The year was 1956. Post-war America sold itself to the world as the land of freedom. But meanwhile, in the alleys of Chicago, in the ghettos of Oakland, in the church halls of Atlanta, a new black consciousness was being born. Men and women were rising like thunder against oppression. And the government trembled. J. Edgar Hoover, the all-powerful director of the FBI, saw in this rise something more dangerous than any war, crime, or external threat. He believed the real threat to American order was the unification of the black community. Thus the project was born. COINTELPRO, Counterintelligence Program. A program of FBI counterintelligence to monitor, infiltrate, destabilize, and destroy any organization considered subversive. But the term, subversive, in that context meant only one thing: any black organization fighting for equality. At first, the target was communists, then socialists. But quickly the FBI's focus turned to something even more threatening: the American black movement. Leaders who preached peace, like Martin Luther King Jr., were classified as dangerous. Leaders who preached self-defense, like Malcolm X, were pursued as terrorists. It didn't matter the rhetoric. The color of the skin and the audacity to think differently were enough to be watched, sabotaged, and eliminated. COINTELPRO was not just a wiretap program. It was a dirty, deep, and cruel game. The FBI didn't just tap phones. They infiltrated agents into churches, community meetings, family gatherings. They forged letters, spread lies, planted false evidence, instigated internal conflicts, manipulated the press, threatened entire families. The strategy was simple and dark: divide to conquer, isolate to weaken, humiliate to silence. Many activists began to distrust each other. Organizations fragmented. Decades-long friendships were torn apart with a fake letter or an anonymous phone call. And the people began to doubt their own heroes. At the heart of all this was a phrase spoken by J. Edgar Hoover that still echoes today like a cry of fear. The greatest threat to the security of the United States is the emergence of a black messiah who could unify the movement. Yes, messiah. That was the word used by one of the most powerful men in America. The FBI saw the awakening of black consciousness as a messianic movement, and would do anything to prevent this new messiah from emerging. And if you think this is conspiracy theory, wait until you discover what they did to Fred Hampton, Malcolm X, and Martin Luther King Jr. COINTELPRO was the invisible poison that corroded the backstage of the black struggle for decades. And in this series you'll learn every method, every strike, every planted lie, with names, dates, files, and consequences. Because this story can no longer be erased. And it's time to tell it like never before. They didn't want martyrs. They didn't want heroes. And above all, they didn't want the black people to have someone to believe in. COINTELPRO knew that a movement without leadership was an easy movement to control. So the first step was to attack the soul of the black movement, its leaders. Direct hit the number one target, Martin Luther King Jr. Martin was a threat precisely because he preached peace. Yes, that's right. For the FBI, the image of a black man who, with words, could move crowds, without weapons, without hatred, was more dangerous than any armed uprising. In 1963, the FBI began to obsessively spy on him. They wiretapped his phone, installed listening devices in his hotel rooms, and sent undercover agents to record his every step. But they didn't stop there. They forged anonymous letters sent to him and his wife, suggesting betrayals, love affairs, blackmail. One of these letters, sent directly by FBI agents, ended with the following phrase: "You know what you need to do. There is only one way out for you." What did the FBI suggest with these words? Suicide. Yes. They tried to push Martin Luther King to emotional collapse, wanting him to take his own life. But he resisted. He kept marching. He kept speaking. He kept inspiring. Until, in 1968, he was assassinated. The shooter? Officially James Earl Ray. But the questions about who really wanted Martin dead still linger today. And many of those questions point to the prior actions of COINTELPRO. Direct hit the second target, Malcolm X. Malcolm didn't preach peace. He preached freedom with self-defense. He said, "If someone lays a hand on you, send them to the cemetery." The FBI knew that this kind of rhetoric empowered blacks tired of silently taking abuse. So they began the dirty work, infiltration and division. They planted distrust between Malcolm and the Nation of Islam, his organization at the time. Fake messages, undercover spies, edited recordings, all were used to make it seem like Malcolm was betraying his own people. Until he broke with the Nation of Islam. He became vulnerable, isolated. On February 21, 1965, he was assassinated with 21 shots while speaking in Harlem. Years later, independent investigations and declassified documents showed that the FBI knew the attack was coming, and did nothing. Direct hit the third target, Fred Hampton. You may not have heard of him, but you should have. Fred Hampton was the leader of the Black Panther Party in Chicago. At just 21 years old, he was already considered one of the greatest speakers of his generation. He not only organized the black community but also created alliances with poor Latinos, working-class whites and marginalized young Asians. He was doing the unthinkable, uniting the oppressed. And the system panicked. COINTELPRO considered Fred an extremely serious threat. So they acted fast. An informant infiltrated the Panther leadership and delivered Fred's address to the FBI. Days later, on December 4, 1969, the police raided his home in the early morning. Fred was sleeping, next to his pregnant girlfriend. He was executed with 2 shots to the head. The autopsy showed that he was heavily sedated at the time of the attack. Yes, they drugged Fred before the execution. This was the COINTELPRO method. No trial. No chance for defense. No justice. They destroyed reputations, ruined families, instigated internal conflicts, and when everything failed, they killed. But it wasn't just about leaders. COINTELPRO infiltrated schools, churches, artistic groups, black journalists, musicians, poets, teachers, priests. They wanted to erase anything that could strengthen black pride. And the scariest part? For decades, all of this was done in secret. Without the people knowing. Without the media reporting it. Without history recording it. Until, by chance, in 1971, a group of activists broke into an FBI office in Pennsylvania. Among the stolen papers was the term that would change everything, COINTELPRO. The program was finally revealed. But the damage had already been done. And if you think COINTELPRO ended there, you haven't seen anything yet. In the next part, we will reveal how the effects of COINTELPRO are still alive today, in systems that seem modern, but are just updated versions of the same old oppression. Many people think COINTELPRO ended in 1971. Yes, it was officially ended after its name was first exposed to the public. But did a system that had learned how to spy, infiltrate, and destroy simply give up everything overnight? Or did it just reinvent itself? When the FBI documents leaked, the government rushed to control the damage. They said that all of that was part of a war on extremism. They issued public apologies, promised reforms, and said that programs like that would never happen again. But the truth is different. COINTELPRO was never just a program on paper. It was an institutional mindset, an ingrained logic that said, if black people organize, it's dangerous. If black people educate themselves, it's a threat. If black people heal, it's an insurrection. And this mindset remained alive, with or without the COINTELPRO acronym. Mobile phone with Arrow, the new era of surveillance, social media, big data, and algorithms. If before the FBI needed undercover agents to monitor meetings, today all it takes is a click. Surveillance became digital. Every like, every post, every live stream by a black activist is recorded, tracked, mapped. Do you think your videos don't reach more people because the algorithm didn't help? Or is it that someone doesn't want that message to spread so far? Technology, which should have been liberating, has often become the new battleground of COINTELPRO 2.0. Man police officer medium dark skin tone, the police system as a continuation of the project. The FBI no longer needs to do the dirty work alone. Today it's done with the help of militarized police, social control tactics, artificial intelligence and anti-protest laws. In 2020, when millions took to the streets chanting Black Lives Matter, The government responded with the same logic as in the 1960s. Infiltration in the groups, monitoring the leaders, secret dossiers, false accusations, and the cycle repeated. It's no coincidence. It's continuity. Moneybag the silent attack. Economic sabotage. Another subtle way to keep the COINTELPRO structure alive was by taking away the livelihood of those who dared to resist. How many black community leaders mysteriously lost their jobs after organizing protests? How many black NGOs struggle to raise funds, while white foundations receive millions to solve black community issues? How many artists, rappers, writers, and thinkers have been silenced, boycotted, canceled, censored, or demonetized without explanation? Yes, oppression is now more polished. But it's still COINTELPRO. Brain the psychological blow continues. The attack on black self-esteem was and still is one of the most effective weapons. TV shows, movies, series, advertisements. For decades, black people only appeared as slaves, criminals, servants, or jokes. And when a black character was the protagonist, they were the villain, the traitor, the one who dies in the end. The mind was trained to doubt itself, to feel inferior, to not believe in their own abilities. This mental war was a central part of COINTELPRO, and it still is. Brick prisons as a new form of control. Over the years, the government found an even more cruel way to eliminate black voices without needing to kill them. Mass incarceration. Today, the United States has over 2 million prisoners, and the overwhelming majority are black. Many of these young people are locked up for minimal crimes. Others haven't committed any crime at all, but they're there out of circulation, far from their families, denied the right to vote, dehumanized. It's a new form of slavery. It's the same COINTELPRO with a different name. The system understood that it no longer needed to publicly assassinate leaders. It was enough to control the environment around them, silence them slowly, sabotage them bit by bit, maintain the appearance of democracy, but with the foundations of oppression intact. But do you know what COINTELPRO never managed to destroy? Memory, the truth, and the ancestral strength of a people who learned to resist even when everything said it was impossible. That's why telling this story is so important. Because as long as it's forgotten, the enemy remains invisible. But when it is remembered, spoken, taught, justice begins to be born. And we're not done yet. In the next part, you'll see how COINTELPRO influenced governments outside the US, how it affected Brazil, how black leaders around the world began to be treated as threats, and why this global structure of black oppression needs to be unmasked. What started as an internal, national security project quickly crossed borders. COINTELPRO didn't stay inside the United States. It became a model for global racial control. Yes, the project to destroy black consciousness was exported. And many governments, especially in countries with majority black populations or strong African presence, began adopting similar strategies. And the scariest part? All of this was done with support, guidance, and direct funding from the United States. Globe showing Europe-Africa COINTELPRO in Africa, sabotaging black leaders on the continent. Have you ever heard of Patrice Lumumba? He was the Prime Minister of Congo after the country gained independence from Belgium. Lumumba advocated for African sovereignty. He wanted Congo to be a model of freedom for all of Africa. But the US and its allies saw him as radical, dangerous, too influential. The result? Lumumba was brutally murdered in 1961. And documents now revealed show that the CIA and the US government were directly involved in his death. Just like with Malcolm X and Fred Hampton, the US used COINTELPRO's formula to destabilize Lumumba. They created internal conflicts. They funded opponents. They spread fake news. They corrupted authorities. And in the end, allowed his execution. His body was dissolved in acid. The goal was clear: to eliminate another black voice that dared to dream of a free future. The Brazilian version of COINTELPRO, racial control disguised as public order. In Brazil, the context was different, but the goal was the same: to prevent the rise of the black people. During the military dictatorship, which began in 1964, espionage and repression strategies were intensified, and Brazil maintained strong ties with the US government. Brazilian military personnel were trained at American schools, like the famous School of the Americas, where techniques of social control, interrogation, and sabotage were taught. And who were the main targets of repression in Brazil? Black leadership in the peripheries, intellectuals from the black movement, Afrocentric cultural groups, politically engaged musicians and artists. One clear example of this was the persecution of Abdias do Nascimento, one of the greatest black thinkers of the 20th century. He was exiled, silenced, His projects were sabotaged. Why? Because he advocated for a Brazil where black people knew their history, occupied positions of power, and rebuilt their dignity. Sound familiar? It's the same pattern as Sioendiopero. Airplane, the international network of oppression. An empire that watches, finances, and represses. Few know, but the United States maintains military bases, intelligence agreements, and covert operations in dozens of countries. And wherever there is an organized black movement, there is also American surveillance. Black groups in Europe, like the Black Lives Matter UK collective, have already reported infiltrations, digital censorship, and government surveillance. In the Caribbean, leaders who denounce American imperialism report economic pressures and judicial persecution. In African countries, every time a new black president tries to break with American and European interests, a mysterious coup d'état occurs. It's as if there were an invisible hand applying the old COINTELPRO recipe. Spread distrust. Finance the internal enemy. Create crises that justify repression. Erase the leader. Performing arts manipulating the black image worldwide. In addition to political actions, the system also attacked the black image globally. Hollywood, for example, has always exported films where the black person was a slave, a criminal, a trafficker, or a murderer. These narratives, repeated for decades, shaped the global perception of black people. When an African child sees on TV that all the heroes are white. When a young Brazilian turns on the TV and only sees black people being arrested. When a black woman in London never sees herself represented with beauty, power, and wisdom. The system wins. This is the invisible COINTELPRO. The cultural version of the same oppression. Seedling, but not everything is lost. In recent years, a wave of black awakening has emerged all over the world. People are rescuing their history. They're creating YouTube channels, writing books, making podcasts, leading movements, redesigning the future. Information is escaping control. Memory is coming back. The black voice is echoing. And that's why the system is more aggressive. Because it feels it's losing control. COINTELPRO was and still is a silent war. But now the truth is being told. And the more people learn this story, the less power it has. In the next part, you'll understand how COINTELPRO still affects you today, even if you've never heard of it before. We'll talk about intergenerational trauma, silent fear, collective self-sabotage, and how all of this was built as part of an emotional control engineering. Intergenerational trauma, an invisible emotional war. Have you ever noticed how many black people from different parts of the world have the same type of trauma? It's almost as if it's a pattern. This pattern is not accidental. It was planted, cultivated, and perpetuated over the years. COINTELPRO wasn't just a physical interference in the lives of black leaders, like Malcolm X, Martin Luther King Jr., and Fred Hampton. It was also an emotional, subtle, deep, and intergenerational interference. The goal of COINTELPRO was to create fear, distrust, and self-sabotage within the black community itself. The idea was to destroy black people's trust in themselves, in their abilities, and in their capacity to organize and fight. Emotional devaluation was an essential part of this control. Does it sound familiar? As if you feel the world is against you, or that it's not worth fighting, or even that you're not capable of achieving certain goals. That, my friend, is the echo of COINTELPRO. And it's something you carry in your emotional genetics from generation to generation. Locked silent fear, a reflection of constant surveillance. COINTELPRO was effective because it worked with the psychological fear of those being persecuted. Have you ever noticed how police violence, mass incarceration, and brutality against black people still don't generate mass uprisings, but instead silence and conformity? This doesn't happen by chance. This is fear. Fear of being silenced. Fear of being a victim. It's the fear created by COINTELPRO, where any black leader who rose against the system was eliminated, discredited, or weakened. Fear spread and infiltrated even the collective consciousness of the black community. It's as if the idea of raising your voice or organizing was synonymous with danger. This fear is often what prevents you and many others from feeling empowered enough to fight. It's in the mind. Counterclockwise arrows button collective self-sabotage. A legacy of mental control. Self-sabotage is one of the most subtle, yet most effective forms of control. When COINTELPRO attacked black leaders, it didn't just destroy their lives. It also planted doubt in the minds of the people around them. The question that always arises is, am I doing the right thing? When Malcolm X broke away from the Nation of Islam and became one of the greatest black leaders in the US, he wasn't just physically persecuted. He was discredited, divided from his own movement, with stories of betrayal being spread against him. This internal division was one of COINTELPRO's greatest weapons. It didn't just destroy the leader, it destroyed the unity of the black community. This is still visible today. Self-sabotage isn't just about failing. It's about doubting yourself before even trying. It's about thinking your success is a threat to the system and therefore you should diminish or avoid it. And this becomes a cycle. When you doubt yourself, you don't move forward. And so the system keeps winning. Derelict housed the lack of unity, divided to reign. When black leaders were silenced, the community didn't come together as it should. There wasn't a strong enough unity to resist what was happening. COINTELPRO divided. And this division was reflected in different forms. The fear of being watched made black organizations and movements distrust each other. Groups were infiltrated, other organizations were manipulated, and in many cases even became informants. And the result of this was lack of alliance building, loss of coherence in the movement, and doubt about who was really fighting for a common cause. But over time, attacks on the black movement began to turn against the oppressors themselves. Flex biceps, the silent revolution, a new awakening. Today many of us still carry the scars of COINTELPRO, but the good news is,